hear about breakouts of all kinds of things happening on cruise ships once or twice a year. And now you've got this highly contagious disease. And so I think it's a difficult issue for an employer because you don't want to control your employees outside of work, but at the same time, what they do outside of work now really can affect the workforce.
You are listening to Legal Skinny Podcast with Trisha Barita. I'm a 15-year licensed practicing attorney in the state of Texas. I created Legal Skinny because when I've been invited to do educational seminars on different subjects in employment law, employers and HR professionals would often ask me, where can they find out a little more information on this or a little more information on that? Look, there's a lot of resources out there, but sometimes it's confusing and people are so busy. Sometimes people have only 30 or 15 or maybe even 5 minutes in their day to devote to learning something new. On this podcast, you'll hear me have discussions and interviews on topics relevant to employers. Disclaimer though, Legal Skinny is for entertainment and informational purposes only, not meant to provide legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. Also, remember, laws change or they differ by jurisdiction, so this is not a substitute for seeking legal counsel in your jurisdiction on the current law applicable to you. Have you caught yourself dreaming of your next vacation? Remember those French Quarter festivals or possible trips to beaches in Cancun, cruising in the Caribbean? Well, if you're thinking about it, let me tell you, your employees are definitely thinking about it. I mean, people are just sick of staying home. And the travel and tourism industries figure that out because they need people to travel. So it's a tricky balance right now, especially when there have been states that are opening up. Airline prices can be at an all-time low to very enviable destinations. This is a tricky situation for our employers. When pre-COVID-19 pandemic, the biggest problem that employers generally were considering when someone asked to go on vacation is, one, does the employee actually have vacation time or PTO? And two, is it going to interfere with someone that does a similar job to them to where some work doesn't get done? Now, employers maybe need to be think a little bit more outside the box in the fact that as employees leave, because nobody wants to staycation right now, even if it's a road trip because they don't go on an airplane, are they exposed to COVID-19? Are they bringing that back into the workplace? And, what are the different questions and thoughts that maybe employers can be thinking about, how to broach that issue? So today I asked a good friend of mine and colleague as a guest, Kamil Canale. She is a practicing attorney and licensed in the state of California and works in a law firm in Los Angeles, California. She's defended clients for more than 20 years in business, employment management side, employment law, and civil litigation matters. Since my topic is the naughty list for travel, I knew Kamil, being in California, could help you weigh in on what these travel restrictions are that we've been seeing the states implement, whether they're not allowing people to come in, or if they come in, more putting them on quarantine, and the different issues surrounding that. So I'm really excited to have Kamil as my guest today. Well, hi, Kamil. Thanks for joining me on the Legal Skinny podcast today.
Thanks so much for having me, Trisha. I'm excited to be here.
So tell me a little bit about your work.
So I practice law in California, primarily litigation, and I represent businesses in employment, employer side, obviously, and civil litigation here in California.
Yeah, we have a little crossover. Obviously, we've been friends for a while now, but I appreciate you coming on. And I we always love these good legal chats, but I know you do a little bit of work on the nonprofit side.
I do. So that's kind of my passion right now. It's called Paws for Life Canine Rescue. And what we do is we take dogs from the high kill shelters in South Los Angeles and we put them, believe it or not, in the California state prison system. We maximum security inmates train the dogs. So all of our dogs that are adopted out have their basic training, they're toilet trained and crate trained. And the dogs that do the best actually go on to be trained by those inmates to be service dogs for our veterans. And it's a great program because obviously it helps get dogs adopted, but it also gives the men in the prison a marketable skill to become employed once they get out. So it's kind of a win-win for everybody involved.
That's some really interesting, cool work. So very, very cool. Well, I brought you on here because look, you got a like wealth of knowledge and experience, and I love our chats, and so I really appreciate you being on the podcast today. We're really looking at what I jokingly call, the naughty list for travel, and well, frankly. Both your state, California, and my state, Texas, just recently got put on the New York naughty list for travel. So let's go back to the beginning of those travel restrictions here that's happened because of COVID-19. It started at least, the first big issue that kind of came out, of course, was some restriction travel to and from China. And I think that while everyone noticed that, and of course, if you had travel plans there or you travel there from work here, that, that affected you, but maybe not as much as when there was that shift when the U.S., with the U.S., I feel like when President Trump came out and said, okay, and I still remember, I think it was a Wednesday night travel restrictions from Europe, because I have family over in Europe, and there was family there at the time that was trying to travel back. And, we were trying to figure out, okay, are they going to be coming back? Is there going to be quarantine measures against them? I personally remember being at the grocery store that night before President Trump had made his announcement, and there was still toilet paper on the shelves. So kind of a vivid memory. I guess it kind of escalated from there. And, the way that I saw it, Texas, I don't think should be surprised considering they started these sort of naughty lists for travel when they put New York and California on the early list when you guys had this COVID-19 outbreaks initially on back in late March, which required some 14-day quarantine for individuals coming back from New York or California, and some of the other states were on that list. So I guess, what do you recall, from the Los Angeles and California perspective of all that kind of time period when these travel restrictions started?
So I actually remember it very well, mainly because I agonized about joining a gym, and I finally joined a gym on Friday, March 13th. And I went for the first time. And I was supposed to go back again the following Monday or Tuesday. I don't remember, but everything was shut down. Like, I literally showed up and there was a sign at the door, on the door for the gym. We're closed. Don't know when we're going to reopen. And so I walked next door. There's a farmer's market type grocery store, and went, and I'll put this in like air quotes, grocery shopping, because the shelves were empty. Like, clean.
Oh, wow.
And so I, to this day, wish I had taken a picture of like the bag of rice that I had to reach all the way back to the back of the shelf to scoop out to buy, because I didn't have anything. We didn't have anything at our house. And so I remember it very well. And I also remember my law firm, we were trying to figure out what we were going to do and get everybody moved home so that we could keep operating during that time too, which I'm proud to say we did.
That's good. But sorry about the gym. I'm guessing the gym has not reopened then.
I think that was a sign from the gods that I am not supposed to work out.
Oh, you're not supposed to be the gym rat you always wanted to be. Yeah, there was so much stuff. I definitely, actually, it's funny you say that about taking pictures at a grocery store. I did take a couple pictures of the grocery store, those sort of temporary signs that went up, only 2 cans of soup, and, for whatever reason, all the bottled water disappearing, and it's kind of interesting, the human reaction that you almost want to buy the things that are out, even though you're like, I don't need these things. Either I have them at home or we never would use these things. But it was interesting here. There was a lot of different products that were gone that I felt like were more hurricane related than COVID-19. But, that's because everyone was trying to figure out like how to sort of hunker down and sort of prepare for this sort of unknown. But switching kind of gears on that, like, because that transition, of course, that we saw, we've seen some different guidance from the CDC, really, but not at the sort of state to state level, but more at the federal level about international travel. And I think, the international travel for people that were going to go on vacations, obviously those vacations, got canceled. At some point, not only were we not letting people in, they stopped letting us in. So we're on the naughty list for Europe, for everywhere else. So the entire of the United States and continues to have, those opportunities. Obviously, the tourism industry has sort of suffered from all of this travel drama, these, what I, again, call the naughty list for travel that, have occurred. But if we switch over and look at that CDC guidance, when they were advising quarantine and people returning internationally, and they still have this advice, is, talking about that 2 to 14 day period of insulation where you're quarantining, and I think sort of addressing the issue of incubation period. You know what I mean? And how I think that could get pretty confusing when you come back from a vacation, you don't have any symptoms, and you're like, I'm going back to work, right? Because I need to get paid. I only had this much time for the vacation. And that's a different kind of thing now for employers to look at someone who did come back internationally or maybe even at the state level. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's difficult because especially when you're traveling, you're exposed to obviously a lot of people that you don't know. So if you're going through an airport, there's hundreds, potentially of thousands of people, if you're at LAX here in Los Angeles, that you're coming into contact with, and you don't know whether they've been exposed and don't have symptoms. You go on a cruise, and the cruise ships really are petri dishes anyway. You hear about breakouts of all kinds of things happening on cruise ships once or twice a year. And now you've got this highly contagious disease. And so I think it's a difficult issue for an employer because you don't want to control your employees outside of work, but at the same time, what they do outside of work now really can affect the workforce. And, God forbid an employee comes back from vacation, has been exposed, doesn't have symptoms, and passes it to a couple other employees who may or may not get symptoms, who then pass it on to a few more. And before you know it, you have a cluster of cases at your work. And so how to address that, I think, is a very difficult and maybe not necessarily straightforward issue right now.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because I think especially with the incubation period, so it's not like they went, it's not like, the employer's examining a situation where, the family member has COVID, or like they were exposed somewhere and they now are having symptoms. That you're dealing with a travel issue. I feel like this issue hasn't even blown up as much just because we have been under these stay-at-home orders. And now, but what maybe some people haven't approached is, especially with the unemployment rate being high, maybe people are afraid to take vacations. But employees are given vacation here. They may not have used any vacation or very limited amount of vacation. So when they take that vacation, are they going to stay home? And if they don't stay home, which a lot of them are tired of being at home and want to go somewhere, whether, and let's face it, I've heard some good prices on the airlines, trying to get people to fly. And, the cruise, we have a cruise port, here. People love cruising, out of Texas. People actually drive from other states sometimes because we're the closest, or they want to fly, they want to cruise with some of the cruise boats coming out of the Galveston area here, south of Houston. And I know you have one, right? Not far from you.
Correct.
The industries are trying to get back up, these travel industries, and it's competing with the fact that, like what you just said, it's just a complete unknown. Obviously, if if you just open it all back up, and people just start traveling like they used to travel, it will change the landscape, I think, of the spread of the disease. But definitely from the employer perspective, how much can they determine, where someone went, what they did they go on a road trip, did they get on an airplane? When they start taking this travel, how concerned should they be with the individual and the employees that even are concerned if they come back, do they need to be bothered by it? Or is it really on the individual, because they're supposed to quarantine under the CDC guidelines if it was international travel, or maybe if there was a state regulation, they were supposed to follow this particular guidance, and that's on the individual. I think it's a tricky thing and potentially a slippery slope, maybe I hate using that word, it's so cliche, but it's a tricky one, right? For employers. I feel like travel really hasn't even been debated out there as much because of all the other issues.
Well, it is. And, even here in Los Angeles, tourism is a huge industry here. And, we have Disneyland down in Anaheim, we have cruises, the beaches. So, Southern California is a huge tourist destination. And so obviously I want tourism to come back because that helps our economy here. But I don't know how far all of these industries are going to have to go in terms of even reporting COVID cases. So, for example, if a COVID case is traced back to a hotel, is that hotel now responsible for notifying every guest that was there on that day that somebody at the hotel tested positive? Do they need to check all their employees? I don't know what the answer is going to be, but it seems like if they're really doing this contact tracing that they're talking about to determine where everybody's picking up these cases, that's something that ultimately will become an issue.
Yeah, I'm laughing because I'm not, obviously I'm not in the business of marketing, but that sounds like a marketing PR nightmare to send out emails of, because I imagine they're not going to call people or text them or email them. Hey, by the way, when you were at the whatever hotel this weekend, there was, a positive COVID case wandering around there, and you may be exposed, and I don't know, maybe that is going to be, they have their own concerns about liability, and it's not clear about where it all goes. But I think you're right. And as we see more people trying to, stay in hotels and stuff, I was talking to somebody over the past week, and they went to New Orleans, and they said it was like the quietest they've ever seen New Orleans. Like they said, you didn't have any table service at Cafe Du Monde down there, and that, there were restaurants boarded up, the horse and buggy carriages weren't happening. It's just a different look to, what is a huge destination for tourism, which I'm sure they're suffering greatly for. And how, if for us, that's not a far drive, people pop over to New Orleans, they come back. If they get exposed, is that even the employer should be concerned about? If, Louisiana has a spike in COVID cases. And I think that is a little tricky too. California has Los Angeles and multiple places, right? And you and I are both on have border states too. So if they go across the border, to whether it's for travel or to visit family for some reason, into Mexico, is that something, now when they're coming back that, is it on the employer to inform the employee of what the CDC guidance is related to that, or is that on the employee to own it to themselves? It's not clear.
It's not clear, but I always think, employers should educate their employees as best they can with the information that's available, simply because a lot of times, employees may not think to look at the CDC or may not think to look at the local health department guidelines. And I think that employers, they know that information is out there, and they're utilizing that information for various aspects of their business already. And so, if an employer knows that an employee is getting ready to take a vacation and they're traveling out of the country, or they're going to Mexico or to Texas or wherever, I don't think it's a bad practice to just let the employee know what the current guidelines are, and to have a conversation with the employee about, self-quarantining or self-isolating when they return. I always say communication with your employees is the number one thing to avoid risk management nightmares.
You say two things, don't you? You say
I do
communication and document that
I do.
communication.
Document that communication, but I always feel like having a good conversation with your employee is it's never a bad thing.
Yeah, I guess maybe something employers could consider doing is having a conversation when they come back, when they, if they knew that they were exposed, if they were at a barbecue with someone with COVID-19, so their employer could at least take steps then to say, okay, were you, potentially exposed to that individual? Because maybe doing nothing when they come back from vacation, at some point that will look back and say, hey, you could have done something. It is a tricky thing because, of course, these individuals have their own privacy and personal rights. So, like, I think it's not clear, but I think if you don't try to figure out whether or not they've been exposed to individuals and you bring them right back into the workforce and not knowing whether or not they should be quarantining, then you're even if they don't have symptoms, you're risking that sort of asymptomatic issue that they, don't develop symptoms at all because they're asymptomatic, or they develop symptoms later on, while they're working for you.
Right. And so it never, one of the things, and I know we've talked about this, Trisha, is whether it's a good idea to have almost a daily checklist of symptoms that every employee in your workforce, answers, as well as whether or not there's been any exposure. So it's kind of a two-step process. First, you have the symptoms, and second, is there a possible exposure? And then you can ask them, to self-isolate for 14 days, and hopefully, either they're off work entirely if they don't have a job where they can be accommodated with telecommuting. And I think that that's something that's kind of working its way out right now. And I don't know how ultimately the law is going to come down on that in California, where we tend to be, the state is very non-employer friendly always.
Yeah. Yeah. It's challenging for your California employers for sure. Right now I feel like it's challenging for all employers, but yeah, some jurisdictions, you're going to be facing different challenges with, how much of this is expected of the employee to report and how much the employer is. But I think it's never a bad thing for at least employers to start thinking, is there a way for them to have a communication, like you said, document prior to them coming back into the workforce, so you can have it. It could be the regular questionnaire. Maybe that's sufficient enough, this daily one. That's a good point, Camilla. I really like that. Now, okay, one more question on this. Because in all seriousness, like the reason we're on the naughty list with New York is because things aren't, we're having problems within our states and increase in COVID-19 cases, which is of course concerning. But the other issue that kind of comes out that I don't also think I've heard a lot about is that these travel restrictions where the states are calling out who's not allowed to come or who's required to quarantine when they do come into the state, it doesn't seem to have any sort of uniformity. So I was wondering what your thoughts are on this, because do you think that the naughty list for travel is it just a phase, or at some point do you think the federal government's going to step in and say, look, we need a uniform list or standard? You can restrict states from coming into your state if the state has this many COVID-19 cases, or this percentage of positive cases. Or is this just going to be like what I feel like it is right now, which is the Wild West, closing the borders or limiting people coming in and going into quarantine, as best they can from state to state?
That's an interesting question. And I think the answer is, I don't think the federal government is going to step in. I think the federal government has left it to be a state by state decision. And that's what's happening in terms of, in California, we're actually still under a stay-at-home order, even though businesses are opening up, and that's creating a little bit of confusion, because it's like, do we stay at home or do we, go out to the businesses that are now allowed to be open? But I also think that if there was something at the federal level, it would create a lot less confusion, especially if there was across the board criteria for allowing or disallowing travel, from location to location.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's been, I think it's interesting. I think I read the other day New York is having people on airplanes coming in, filling out questionnaires now. They're getting very hands-on in making sure these naughty list people are quarantined as soon as they come in. So I maybe we won't see any federal guidance on this, and it will just be the Wild West as I suggested. And I call it, in my mind, the Wild West because is that this is just really hard for employers to keep up with all the things going on as to what these travel restrictions are. It's not like there's one place you can go to determine if your employee went to Key West this weekend on these super cheap flights that they have going to Key West, whether or not Florida's on that list or not. And at the point in time of when that happens, so tricky thing. I'll have to stay tuned. Maybe I'll have you back on if we get some more clear guidance on this, but
I know that's going to happen. I really not.
Well, either way, Kamil, I really love having you on the podcast here today. Do you mind if we do the Legal Skinny rundown?
Not at all.
All right. Beach or mountains?
It's California, the beach.
Elvis or the Beatles?
Beatles.
Most influential book you read?
Oh, God. So my whole thing is I listen to a book on Audible while I'm commuting, and I haven't been commuting because we're under the stay-at-home order, and I cannot think of a book title to save my life at the moment. Sorry.
You'll have to get back to me on that.
I will have to get back to
All right. Dead or alive, which famous person would you invite to dinner?
That's easy. RBG. Ruth Bader Ginsburg. No question.
Maybe I should be surprised by that answer. All right. Finally, 1 minute or less. What is the skinny on travel during COVID-19 for employers?
Well, I personally think just in general, err on the side of conservative, don't have your employees travel if you can at all avoid it. I know some businesses are, very involved in sales and you can't continue to operate, but if you can drive instead of fly, I think that's safer because there's less exposure. And I think this is something that's going to continue to evolve. So, stay tuned to your local health department and the CDC.
That is some good advice for that, for sure. So if someone wants to get in touch with you, what is the best way to do that?
So you can get in touch with me through Bradley and Gamelik LLP on our website, www.bglawyers.com, or you can email me at kcanale at B as in boy, G as in girl, lawyers with an S.com.
Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on the Legal Skinny podcast. I really enjoyed this discussion, and that's Legal Skinny on the naughty list for travel. So to get the Legal Skinny on the other topics, check out legalskinny.com, and don't forget to sign up for the Legal Skinny newsletter to get all things Legal Skinny. Thank you, Kamil.
Thanks for having me. Have a great day.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Legal Skinny podcast. Do not forget to subscribe to get future podcast episodes. Also, check out legalskinny.com to join our newsletter and get details on all the educational resources we offer for the employer. Also, disclaimer, remember, Legal Skinny is for entertainment and informational purposes only, not meant to provide legal advice, and does not create an attorney-client relationship. Laws change or they differ by jurisdiction, so also remember this is not a substitute for seeking legal counsel in your jurisdiction on the current law applicable to you.